closest I got to finding the language for my identity was people in my high school used to call me homophobic slurs because they thought that I was a lesbian. Lesbian terms didn't fit, so I was really confused. And I walked past a mirror one day and I just saw myself and I was like, oh, that's a boy. And it hit me like a wall. Like suddenly it was too obvious to miss. Something that my father said a lot in therapy was, I put my daughter on a plane and I don't know who came back. And that was...
Welcome back to the Let Me Be Perfectly Queer podcast. I'm your host, Beth, and this podcast is brought to you by the UFV Pride Collective. We are filming here at Civil Radio, CIVL 101.7, also CIVL.ca, and we are recording on Stalo territory at the University of the Fraser Valley. In this episode, I had a conversation with Nate. They are a gender non-conforming person, a member of the Pride Collective, and a good friend of mine. We discussed polyamory, gender identity, fanfiction, and more. I hope you enjoy listening to this episode of the Let Me Be Perfectly Queer podcast. Nate, what brings you to this podcast today?
You have invited me to the podcast today.
Why did I do that?
Because I'm gay, probably. 'Cause I'm just a little bit, though. Like, such a small,
yeah,
teensy bit.
Yeah, you're like the straightest gay person I've ever met.
Yeah.
So. Do you want to show your t-shirt that you brought today?
Yeah.
Which we have t-shirts, guys. Just kidding, we don't. But it's so perfect.
Right?
I love it.
You told me that this was going to be the name of the podcast, and I was like, did I guess this 3 years ago when I bought this t-shirt?
You manifested it.
I manifested it.
Yeah, no, I think it's I really like the name. I think it's a good like podcast name because it's like, let me be perfectly clear, but like queer.
Yeah, and it also, I was thinking about it this morning, and it also invokes the feeling of self-expression. Like, let me be perfectly queer. I am perfect as I am. So it's also, it feels very comfy in that way, you know?
Yeah, that's so true. That's a really good way. Yeah, that's a good explanation. Making me sound smarter than I actually am. Like, I was just, it's a funny pun.
Maybe you're just really subconsciously smart and you don't realize that, you know? Subconsciously.
I think I am.
Yeah.
I think I am a genius. You're right.
I think so too.
Okay. So you are Nate and you use the pronouns he, they, it.
Yes, I do.
Could you explain to me like each one and why that one feels comfy for you? And I feel like the first two people are probably more familiar with, but that last one is a little interesting.
Spicy.
So yeah, it's spicy.
Spicy one.
It's a spicy one.
Yeah. So let's go in order then. He, him. That was the first pronoun that wasn't, my original pronoun that I started using when I first started identifying as some sort of trans or non-binary. I went from she, her to he, him. So that one's always been a bit of a comfy one for me. And it just, I was in a really good friend group when I started using it. So even though I don't always relate to he, him these days, it still reminds me of those friends and of that time. So that's just kind of a cozy, always safe one for me right now. They, them is, I've been getting more comfortable with the non-binary and gender fluidness of my identity. And that one's just kind of the non-binary pronoun that everybody knows about, right? Like there's also neopronouns like the Fae pronouns, Z pronouns, all of those ones. And while I like when people use them on me, like I like kind of being a sounding board for pronouns for people to be able to practice with, it's just there's so many and I kind of feel overwhelmed to pick. And it's like people are more likely to use they, them than they are to use the neopronouns. So I just feel like I get to kind of use that one more often in more heteronormative, cisnormative spaces than if I were to like ask somebody to use Fae pronouns or something along those lines. And its pronouns, those feel the closest to my actual experience with gender. My gender feels very chaotic. It feels very goblin energy. I don't really relate to any experience with gender that I have seen outside of my physical self. When I picture somebody with its pronouns, it's just this black nebulous cloud floating through a room, and that kind of feels like the energy I put out sometimes. I've also had that used on me, so that's a part of it.
In like a negative way?
In a negative way.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I, like growing up, when I was younger and I didn't realize I was gender nonconforming, but I was still playing with gender. I was a tomboy, I would get its pronouns because people were trying to make fun of me. And I always was like, oh, that's kind of fun. But also like, oh, that sucks. I'm not an object.
Yeah, because I know like that's why a lot of people are uncomfortable with using its pronouns for other people, especially because it has that kind of dehumanizing quality to it.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, it depends how you look at it. How did it stop like becoming dehumanizing for you?
I started using it again once I was seeing my current partner, Caden. He lives, no longer, he lives with me now, but he used to live in a queer collective with about 7 other queer, gender nonconforming, all sorts of rainbow, lots of trans people. It was like 90% trans people there. And I met these 2 lovely trans femme people, and they used my its pronouns so respectfully, and like they were always so excited to see me. I would walk in the house and they would go, oh, it's here, and it felt like such a celebration including that pronoun. So I didn't really start using it in public spaces until I'd gotten comfy with it in that space, feeling safe using it in a queer space, in a space that really celebrated my pronouns. And I actually got introduced to 2 other people through that collective who also use its pronouns. So it kind of helped me foster its community, you know? And then once I started bringing it into more public spaces, it kind of became an inside joke when people would try to use an its pronoun on me to make fun of me. And I'd go, you used the spicy one.
That's so validating. Thank you.
So much. I didn't know I was giving its today. That's amazing.
That's so funny. I really love that aspect of it, that like, yeah, like you can, and like same with people who use like any pronouns. It's like you can try as hard as you want to misgender me, to upset me, but it's not going to work. And it's like really claiming that power there is it's so cool.
The only one that I'm still struggling to be comfortable with is she, her. And that's because I was stuck in that one for so long. I would like to reclaim it someday. I would like to be able to use it and find cozy spaces for it, because I've written it in journals before. There was a time where I was journaling for an art class, and at the top of each one, I would write what my pronouns were for the day, and so how I was feeling. And I had a lot of she, her ones, but I never used them in public because I wasn't comfortable hearing it put upon me by other people yet. And I'm still processing that, but like one day I'm going to have all the pronouns, and I'm going to be so powerful.
You got to catch them all.
I got to catch them all.
It's really interesting how you describe like the feeling of she, her, or the feeling of he, him. Like, so what is, I guess what I'm asking is like, what is gender to you? Like, how do you conceptualize it? Is it a feeling that you have? Is it how other people see you? Is it your role in society? Like, what is gender?
There's so many different ways to gender. It's, I mostly, the way that we talk about it these days, gender feels like the social construct. Of course, that's the word going around right now. Gender is a social construct, which it is. In most discussion spaces, I talk about gender in how it's put upon us by other people. But my personal experience with gender feels very alien, I guess, very separate. I have a hard time actually relating to it on a personal level and knowing what it actually means to me. That's something I'm still really exploring. I think it's a really scary feeling to actually dig in to gender and what it means personally to you, as opposed to saying, I'm going to pick that one, I'm going to stick with that one because that feels the comfiest right now. It's hard to actually dig it apart. Is that a decent answer?
I mean, there's no wrong answers here. Like, gender, that's the thing. Like, it's so subjective. It is. And, like, we can never really know how anyone experiences gender. Like, I know I say, like, I'm comfortable with my identity as a woman, but actually, like, calling myself a woman was hard for me, especially, like, going through puberty, because I was like, no, I'm a girl. Like, I don't align with that sort of, I think it was like the maturity and the sexuality that's associated with the word woman that I was so uncomfortable with, like especially as an asexual person. I just had a really hard time like comfortably saying like I am a woman, you know? I feel like I've gotten more comfortable with it definitely as I've aged, but it's really interesting like how everybody kind of understands gender, and it can be really different. And at the same time, it can be comfortable to just say like I fit into this box. Like, I'm a girl, the world tells me what girls are supposed to be, so I can be that. and now people like me and I'm accepted and I belong.
Mm-hmm.
But when you don't fit into that box, it can be really weird, really scary sometimes.
Yeah, and when you don't fit into that box, suddenly everything is nebulous because there's not really... On the internet, there's more solid discussions, but I find when I'm out in my community in physical spaces, I have a hard time actually pinning down what gender means to any one person. So it's suddenly there's two boxes, and then outside of it is never-ending space. And you're like, which part of this space do I want to be in, or do I want to float around in all of it? There's just so much out there.
When you first went from she, her to he, him, like you went kind of like from one binary to the next, right?
Yes.
Was that the same for your expression and like the way you acted? Like, were you trying to fit all the traditional masculine roles?
Sort of. I was already kind of slowly flowing into that. So I guess I'll give some background with a bit of my coming out story.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, and it's a coming out story to myself, really, because I'm an oblivious person. Sometimes information will hit me like a wall, and I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was living in Japan at the time when I came into my identity. I was studying abroad through our school's study abroad program. I was about halfway in. We were doing a break, and I was just hanging out at my house. I'd had a haircut because my parents couldn't tell me that it was too short, so I could cut it as short as I wanted to. And I did. It was like as short as it is right now. It was so nice. And I walked past a mirror one day and I just saw myself. I was like, oh, that's a boy. And it hit me like a wall. Like suddenly it was too obvious to miss. I was like, oh, I am a boy. Like I'm not just seeing that. That's what I'm experiencing right now is a different gender than I'm used to experiencing. I'm seeing myself differently and I'm feeling happy to look in the mirror and I'm feeling excited. And like, I had such like a soft smile when I did that. And I'd never looked at myself in the mirror like that before. So it was just, ugh. So my expression was already shifting a little bit, but I was also living in Japan at the time and learning in Japan at the time. So on a day-to-day basis, I would say, I was still pretty conservative, with my dress. I couldn't go from A to B in the classroom. I couldn't tell my teachers. I couldn't tell all of my fellow students because it just wasn't exactly a safe culture to do that in for me at the time.
Yeah.
Especially as a foreign student, I'm like, I don't want to get kicked out. I don't know what I could do to get myself in trouble, But in my friend group, I had 3 very close friends, 2 from Canada, 1 from France, and they were so supportive. I came out to each one of them separately on my own time, and they were just so excited for me. And one of them was like, let me help you pick your name, and that's this name I still have today. Like, they were
really?
Yeah, that was that'll bleed into my talk about religion a little bit, but that was a really healing moment for me to have a friend sit down and pick a name with me, and they were the ones sobbing because they were so excited. And I was like, yeah, well, no, that's Nathan's good. We'll do that one. We can do Nathan.
Aww. What were there any names that you almost went with, or was it just like Nathan was clearly the standout?
Nathan wasn't even a thought in my brain until they came up to my room and were slamming their fist on my door, and they were like, it has to be this one. I had a little book of them, and I had Oliver, I had Martin, which are now my middle names. I had Calvin for a while because my mom used to compare me to Calvin from Calvin and Hobbes a lot.
That's cute.
Yeah, but because he's like a little disturber. I'm trying to find a better word.
A little what disturber?
A little
disturber.
But so that felt kind of like a callback to my family, but none of it actually felt comfy. But we practiced all of them. My friends were willing to call me those. And then we landed on Nathan and we stayed with that one. And we practiced the he, him pronouns when we were all together in our little group. So that was that transition period for me. I didn't get to really be out publicly unless I was drunk. Then I would tell everybody.
You go around what would you do? What would you do?
I got a secret. I'm a boy. Very seductive. I'm actually a boy. It's so silly. I can remember this one time I went on an outing with a group of the foreign exchange students, and none of them were my little group of 3, so I felt very nervous. But I came up to this girl Hannah in our group from the States. She was so nice and so quiet. I was surprised she was at that outing because she was very very mousy, you know? And we were walking back. I was such a lightweight at the time. I was hammered. And we were kind of trailing at the back of the group. And I leaned in and I said, I gotta tell you something. I'm a boy. And she goes, oh, that's why you used the boys' washroom the other day in the dorm. I go, yeah. And she goes, do you want me to change your pronouns, like when we're talking in public spaces? And I'm like, no. I just want you to know. And then I like sauntered off. My drunk walked away. Just like, I got to drop that with you and I got to go because I got to tell more people.
Thank God for alcohol. Like, how would we ever tell people anything without it?
It was the first time I told my boyfriend I loved him.
Really?
I told him, I called him drunk from my house. I was like, I love you. I'm going to tell you this tomorrow as well when I'm not drunk, when I'm sober, I promise. Because I know this isn't really cool of me to do drunk. But I do love you. And then there was more conversation. But then I hung up. And then the next morning I called him and I was like, I do still love you. Like that wasn't just me being drunk. I do feel that. And then we had like a whole conversation about it.
Yeah.
Alcohol does a lot.
Yeah, it does. Try not to rely on it, but you know.
Too much. It does too much sometimes.
It didn't make you a boy. That happened before you were drunk.
That happened. Oh, God. I didn't touch substances until like a year and a half, maybe 2 years into my transition.
Oh, really?
Yeah, no, I used to be very...
So how old were you when you had that like looking in the mirror moment?
I was 20, 19 turning 20.
Really?
I didn't smoke weed for the first time until I was about 22. And then I got stuck on it for the pandemic, as you know. And alcohol, I tried it before, but it wasn't something that I did regularly. Like I would go to a family function and my dad would sneak me a beer, or I'd go out with some friends and I'd get to have one shot of vodka, you know, sneaky under the table stuff because I was still like underage.
Yeah.
But it was never something that I got excited to do or I identified with or used to process emotions. It wasn't until I was in like my early 20s that I started playing with that.
That's interesting. You waited even longer than me because, like, for me, like, as soon as I was 19, I started drinking. And I mean, that first drink, the religious guilt was still a little bit strong. Then after that, like, I got drunk for the first time with some, like, close friends that I trusted and admitted some things that felt like a weight off my chest. Won't go into detail, but, and after that, I was like, this is pretty cool. Like, I'm going to do this not all the time, obviously, because that's not healthy, but I'm going to do this more. Yeah. Anyways, where were we?
I don't know. But also, while we're getting back on track, I got ADHD and I got autism. So my brain is going to go sometimes. Feel free to gently pull me back on track if you need to, okay?
That's okay. I feel like it's good because it gives you like the whole picture, you know? Like you get all the context and...
You get Nathan's chaotic gender experience firsthand when you let me go off track and just go wherever my brain wants to go.
Exactly. But yeah, do you want to tell me about the experience, like coming home? And then did you find a place that you could start then more like publicly presenting as a boy? And like how long did that take?
Yeah, so I'd like to preface this with me and my parents are very cool now. They're awesome. They're some of my biggest allies. They're always excited to hear about Pride Collective stuff, about book club stuff. It's an amazing relationship that I have with them now. But at the time, they were extremely conservative in their beliefs, in how they vote. They were a little religious, but it wasn't based in that. Like, it was surprisingly, like, we believe in God, but kind of when it suits us, you know, was the feeling. We never prayed at dinner. It was never too heavy. But at the time, when I came out to them, it was heartbreaking. It was the end of my world. I suddenly, because I was living with them before I went to Japan, I would plan to come back to live with them after, and I planned to come out to them after I came back from Japan. But there was a moment where I was basically forced to come out to them over Zoom call, and that ended that relationship for a little while because they refused that identity. They said, we're not going to do that. It's not cool with us. It was really painful. So I came home and we tried to kind of sort it out because they wouldn't kick me out. They wouldn't do that to me. They were like, we're not going to make you homeless. But there was constant fighting. It was an environment filled with animosity that I just couldn't be in so early in my transition and into finding myself. Now that I'd found it, I was like, I can't let it go. So I have to go be somewhere where I can be comfortable. So I made the choice to leave. I packed up all of my stuff, put it into my car, and I stayed at my friend Sam's place for I think about 2 months. And he and his wife were just lovely. Like they would bugger up the pronouns because they'd known me as she, her for quite a while, but they used the name and they slowly got used to using the he, him pronouns. We'd have dinners together every once in a while. We'd just play video games. He would mess with me on the Netflix because I'd be watching Netflix in his living room because I just stayed on his couch, right? He had this big, nice, comfy fold out one that I lived on. And I would be watching whatever I wanted to watch and he would change it to Dragonheart, which is just, I would love to put it on the screen because it's so garbage, but it's got such big names in it. It had like Ian McKellen and it had like the voice actor for Gandalf, I believe, the voice actor for like one of the Star Trek, Picard or whatever. It had big names in it basically, but it was just absolute hot garbage. And he would put it on regularly to interrupt my stuff. So it was kind of like a brotherly relationship that I got to have there. And I got to experience what I needed from myself in that time without being in that environment that my home had become. I also started working at Spencer's. And Spencer's is it's corporate, but it's very queer. Yeah. So that was really comfy as well, having coworkers that were so ready to use whatever pronoun I needed at that time to, like, if I needed to switch names on a dime, like, it was just, I felt cozy there. You know, I felt seen and I didn't feel trapped in an identity. I felt like I got to experiment with myself.
Was that the Spencer's, like, in Abbotsford?
Yep.
Seven Oaks, right?
Yeah, so I lived in Chilliwack and I came out to Abbotsford to work.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And was your friend that you were staying with, was he in Chilliwack?
Yes.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, and then eventually I did move out here to Abbotsford because I couldn't stay living on my friend's couch, right? So my parents eventually helped me find a place in Abbotsford and we put a down payment on it. So I own that place. That's mine. And I've been living there ever since.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Was there a moment with your parents, like, did you ever ask them or did they ever talk to you about it after, like, why they had such a strong reaction in the beginning and, like, what kind of underlying feeling caused that for them? Like, was it fear? Was it, grief? Like, what was it?
It was grief, I would say. We haven't really had a conversation where we pulled that apart properly because they're from a generation where a lot of people have a hard time talking about their feelings, right? And what got them there and pulling themselves apart in therapy. But we did go to family therapy, and it did help me to realize that what they were going through was grief. Something that my father said a lot in therapy and just while I was living with them was, I put my daughter on a plane and I don't know who came back. And that was obviously from my side extremely painful to hear because I'm like, I am still your child and I'm still here. I don't know why you're alienating me from you. So when I had some time to actually process that and get away from my immediate reaction to that, I was able to realize they are grieving because they think they've actually lost their child. I'm still here, but they are processing this as a loss. Because I did come back looking different and acting different and carrying myself different. So it was a big change for them that they didn't realize they needed to be ready for.
So what was it like growing up in Chilliwack, first of all, and then also, trying to come into this new identity in this town that's has a bit of a reputation?
Yeah. So to talk a bit about my experience growing up in Chilliwack, I was visually and kind of outwardly identifying as a straight white girl. And I mean, I am white. I wasn't identifying as white, but And I came from, I would say, like a middle class family. So I had it pretty easy as far as people growing up in Chilliwack. I mean, I'd get the cat calls, that every woman, every girl is used to growing up anywhere, basically. But I mean, I had it, I'd say, pretty easy, except for the gender stuff, which of course is all the internal stuff that I was dealing with growing up and not understanding why you felt different because nobody around you would give you the language for it. The closest I got to finding the language for my identity was people in my high school used to call me homophobic slurs because they thought that I was a lesbian or that I was bisexual, mostly a lesbian because bisexuality was still like a really contentious issue at the time where we were like, you can't like both. That's greedy. Bisexuals don't exist, like unicorns, that kind of thing. But I would get called a lot of Sapphic slurs, and it just didn't make sense to me because I knew, I was like, that doesn't fit me. I know that doesn't work because I don't like girls, which of course I now realize I did. I held on to my female friends for the hugs for just a couple seconds too long. It was just a little too gay, But lesbian terms didn't fit, so I was really confused. I got tomboy, but never did I get trans, never did I get non-binary. Those were just not things I got to talk about with people. And when you don't get to talk about it, it just doesn't exist. And I think that's part of, there's this whole debate about should we bring gender and sexuality and identity into schools. I am firmly on the yes, of course, because if you don't talk about it, we just don't know. It's not in our realm.
It's not going to make it go away.
It's not going to make it go away. I was in a bit of a Facebook debate the other day where I think I commented something like, fun fact, trans, gay, and queer adults were all once trans, gay, and queer children.
That's so controversial.
Right? To think. It's not something that you can get taught and turn into. And if you did, you would come back to your actual identity pretty quickly. That's how I came into I didn't get taught any of it, and yet here I am. It's pronouns, you can't refuse it out of somebody. We will come into it eventually. So it just wasn't on my radar until I was in Japan, until I was in this space. All of the international students were still talking about me and what flavor of queer I was.
What flavor?
Yeah, what flavor is that? But it was not in this negative context that I had experienced growing up in Chilliwack. It became like, hey, I want to know so that I can help you flirt with girls because you like girls, right? And I'd be like, no, but maybe it's this. And they'd be like, oh, can I help you with that? Like, it was people were excited to help me with my identity and to figure it out. I think some of them were just excited to meet like a Canadian queer, and they were like, let me be part of that. But I mean, it was still this happy curiosity as opposed to people trying to tear you down in your hometown. So coming from Chilliwack, obviously there's also quite a religious aspect to that town. There's churches on every single road, a couple on some of them just directly across from each other, as is Abbotsford.
Yeah, we've got that like just down the road from UFV to like right across the street.
Yep, and there's one like off of Marshall or something like that where there's like 3 of them all on that corner. It's ridiculous. But I did go to church, not because my parents made me, but because I was bored, because there's nothing to do out there. My friend went to church, and I started following her because I was like, what else am I going to do except for tip cows? And I'm too little for that. So I guess I'll go to church.
I mean, they had like, I don't know if yours had that, but my church had like hot chocolate and like snacks sometimes. So
yep. We had snacks. We had Sunday school, so we would watch VeggieTales. I'd walk in. Yeah, I'd walk in, I'd peek my head in, and I'd go, what are we doing today? And they'd go, we're doing Bible study. I'm like, I gotta go. I'd peek my head in on a different day. What are we doing? The TV's up? Is it VeggieTales? I'll stay. I can stay for that. I was just bored. There was never I never connected spiritually in that environment because I was just trying to kill time. And I think a lot of kids that grow up in like these rural towns are just really trying to kill time. So they get really invested in these churches because they're like, what else am I going to do? My friends are here. There's nothing.
Did you ever go to any youth groups?
I did.
Yeah.
Oh, I did. Funniest story. There was this boy that got a crush on me at one of the youth groups.
Ooh.
And I didn't like him like that, but I like teasing him because I like making fun of men. But I used to go to youth all the time, and I would just kind of like poke at him, and he'd poke back at me. And one church day, my friend came up to me, and she said, he's going to ask you out next church. He's going to ask you out next time. And I never went to church again.
I remember you told me this story.
Yeah, I never came back.
That was it.
I was done. I was like, I gotta go because I'm gonna have to say no, and I don't have the balls to do that yet. So I just gotta go. I feel bad about it sometimes. I'm like, that must have been rough for him. He probably thinks that he's ruined my whole like God experience or something.
He condemned you to hell because he wanted to ask you out.
Exactly.
How is he ever gonna recover from that?
How is he ever gonna get into heaven now?
Yeah.
He sent me on the wrong path. Like, look at how far away he sent me.
He ruined me.
But I did youth group. One of my favorite days was when we made like the pickles out of the Kool-Aid. You know, they taste disgusting, but they're colorful. It was rainbow. I was like, I don't know why this is so nice. Why do I connect to the rainbow?
That's interesting. I never did that in any of my youth groups, but
Oh, the Kool-Aid pickles? Don't.
no.
It's not worth it.
That sounds actually really weird.
It's just you make pickles in Kool-Aid. So, like, when you do that, it colors the pickles. So they come out, you've got, like, pink pickles, you've got orange ones, you know, it's just... But, like, you can do that with other coloring, and they don't taste like garbage.
Yeah, I can imagine.
They taste awful.
It sounds like it.
It's just a cheap thing to do with a bunch of kids.
Yeah. I don't think we never did Kool-Aid pickles, but I think the weirdest thing that ever happened at one of my youth groups was they had this competition where there were two people, they were like pairs, and there was some kind of food. I don't remember if it was like chips or like, it could have even been something more gross like spaghetti, but one person had to feed the other person with their feet.
Wait, this was at church?
This was at youth group, yeah, but it was in a church. So they had to like grab it with their feet and like feed it to
Not
the
for free.
I know. Don't send your kids to youth group.
Don't send your kids to church.
Unless it's gay church. Have you ever been to a gay church?
I haven't. No, but I think there's not one in Abbotsford, but there's one that like puts out a lot of rainbow flags. Is that a gay church? I pass by it all the time in downtown.
Is it the one close to Old Hand Coffee?
Yes.
Yes. No, that is a gay church. That's a
We should go to gay church.
honestly, I'm down because actually I went to it's Trinity United Church, I think.
Okay.
But it's part of the United Churches of Canada, and I went to one of those churches in Langley, and it is super gay. Like,
See, there was stuff about church that I did find fun. You're in a community, you're all singing together. You know, some people like are really nice to you until they find out you're some sort of flavor of rainbow. So a gay church?
yeah.
That sounds fun.
The only problem...
Send your kids to gay church.
Yeah, exactly. The only problem with the one that I went to and why I don't go to church anymore was, like, I mean, you mentioned it before, like, you never really connected spiritually with the churches that you went to. I kind of felt that with the church I went to in Langley. And I had friends there that I really loved, and that's why I kept going. But eventually they stopped going, and then... And now that I'm in Abbotsford full time, it's not really realistic for me to go there anymore. But you know, I still really admire that whole denomination of churches and like what they're trying to do and how affirming they are of like LGBTQ plus people. But it's still just church.
Yeah, to bounce off of the spirituality. Like I have a hard time fitting in to one. Like organized religion is so difficult because it's kind of the same as gender. You know, it's a box. You can't relate to every part of that box, and you're never gonna... I find most people aren't gonna find one church that does everything they needed to and they feel really spiritually fulfilled. You know, it's hard. I find that my spiritual practices are very personal. They're at home. My boyfriend's quite spiritual, so he calls it his woo-woo shit. So I mostly bounce off of him when we're doing that. We do our affirmations together. We have like a little shrine that we have at home for like all of our jewelry and all of our crystals and all of that kind of stuff. It's more just like in taking care of the self and taking care of the earth at this point than actually going to a building and praying to an eternal being. I think my ideal church setup would just be a building with lots of different rooms that are all done up like lots of different religions across cultures, and everybody gets to go to this building and go off to their separate rooms and practice however they want to practice, and then we all get to commune together and go like, how was your prayer today? How was whatever you did? Like, let's all just go be spiritual together and like unify each other, you know, without it having to be, we have to practice this one religion in this building. What if we practiced all of them in this building?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's That would be really cool, actually.
Right? You
That would
need
be
a pretty
really
big building for that, because some of these like religious spaces require pretty big rooms for practice. But like, I feel like if we could get just one of those out in the greater Vancouver area, get some money in for the rest of them.
Yeah.
You know, build a couple more.
Yeah, and that's the one thing about church, that like all the problems that there are with typical churches, the one thing that they did right was like having that sense of community, like giving that opportunity to, you know, everybody in the neighborhood goes there on a Sunday morning. You get to see your neighbors, you get to see your friends, and it really connected people. And like
People bringing food in and doing a big potluck and all feeding each other, sharing recipes. It's really a hub.
And we haven't been able to replicate that in like for like a more secular or just general spiritual worldview, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah. I think there's a lot to be taken from spirituality as well. So it's really a shame when you try to enter these spiritual spaces and you suddenly are within very strict borders of what you're allowed to do, what you're allowed to experience, how you're allowed to experience your spirituality. You know, it's gotta be a do it yourself. Otherwise, you're not gonna enjoy it, and you're not gonna be fully fulfilled how you want to be. Also, don't send your kids to any church. Let me clarify that. let them come into spirituality on their own time, however feels coziest to them. Like, don't send your kids off to any religion. That's my take on it. That's dangerous, because that's not them choosing. That's not them feeling their way into it. And the same with gender. You can't put them in that box and know that it's gonna work. They gotta walk into that themselves.
Do you think like church obviously should be like a choice for kids? If they want to go, they should go? Or do you think that it should be like a wait until you're older kind of thing?
That's a tough one, because I want to say yes, if you want to go, because I did have some fun experiences going to church. I messed with boys. I played Pokemon under the bleachers. I got to watch VeggieTales. I got to eat some good food. You know, there was a lot of fun that I did pull from it, and because a part of that is because I wasn't openly queer, though. So I think there needs to be a real reform of how we have churches before I feel safe to say, yeah, if your kids want to go. Maybe where we are right now, I would probably say look into the church. See if they're affirming of different cultures and different identities and different backgrounds. Like, they don't need to be a church that lets you practice every spirituality there, but they need to be willing to have every kind of person, no matter what you weigh, no matter what color your skin is, no matter how you identify, no matter who your partner or partners are. Like, they got to be willing to accept you. That would be my basis for letting my kid go to church if they wanted to go to church.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And unfortunately, it is so hard to find churches that match all of that criteria. Like there are actually quite a few churches that are very progressive in terms of accepting different like races and genders, and like, you know, women can like have authority in the church and like whatever. But it's that queer part that just always gets them, and I don't know why.
Is. And there are even some that are like, we love the gays. Trans? No.
Really?
Like, yeah, like they're so close. I'm like, it's not even that much of a jump. You don't need to do anything more. You just need to be less of what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
You know?
So you said when you practice spirituality, it's with your boyfriend sometimes. So let's talk about your boyfriend more, and also the fact that you are polyamorous and how that sort of works together. Because I think polyamory is one of those things that a lot of people still don't understand and are very critical of. And like some people are just like, no, like it's just cheating no matter what.
Yeah. I think part of that is there's so many different ways to be polyamorous. I saw a chart once and it was like one of those overlapping Venn diagram ones of all of the different ways. There was like 60 of them all overlapping with each other. Like, you can have an open relationship, you can have a triad where all three of you are dating each other, you can have a hinge where one of you is dating two different people and they're not dating. There's so many different ways to be polyamorous that it's hard to have that conversation with people. My personal experience, not relating really to my boyfriend yet, is I find myself very polyromantic. I'm pretty asexual spectrum. So I'm not really looking to get into sexual relationships with lots of people, but I like to be open to the idea of a romantic or a really deeply platonic relationship with multiple people, just letting it come as it wants to come. That's a big part of, I think, all polyamory, is we want to let our relationships manifest however they want to manifest naturally. I currently only have my one boyfriend because, like I said, I'm pretty polyromantic. I don't go out looking. If I fall in love with somebody and they fall in love with me back, awesome. We'll figure that out. But it just hasn't happened yet. But I had the space to let it happen, and that's really made me feel much more comfortable to be with my boyfriend because I don't feel bound in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm only bound to him in the ways that I want to be. And that's, I want to spend the rest of my life with him. I want to be his husband. I want to have babies with him. I want to travel the world with him. I want to have grandbabies with him. I want to have so many different generations of cats with him. Some frogs. We've been talking about frogs. He wants a frog real bad. We've been planning his little terrarium. He's like, I'm going to put pothos in it. And it's so cute. His experience with polyamory is very different than mine. He's very polysexual. So he's got a bit of a higher sex drive than I do. I can't keep up for the life of me. So he's got friends that he basically takes it out on. And they're awesome too. Some people don't want to meet their partner's other partners. And that's okay. That's I think that's called a metamor relationship. You recognize that you're okay with your partner being polyamorous, but you really don't want to interact with those people. That's a very valid way to do polyamory. But I like knowing them, and I like to be able to judge them sometimes. If he picks one up and I'm like, you're better than this. Come on. He goes on Grindr sometimes and he's like, look at this guy. And I'm like, block that. I'll take it out of his hand and I'm like, you got to block that. That's a no. You're better than that.
What about the Douglas College guy?
Oh my God. Yeah, can I tell that story a little bit?
Please.
Oh,
it's so funny.
In the Vancouver and greater Vancouver area, there's all of these ads right now up by Douglas College which say something like, who promotes inclusivity on campus? I do. And it's a picture of a non-binary or trans masc person. It's just a gender non-conforming person. And Caden found that person on Grindr and he got into go because you don't match on Grindr, right? You just message. You either just
I don't know how Grindr works.
Yeah, so it's not like Tinder. You don't swipe left or right. You just basically click on the profile and you can either click a little thumbs up fire icon I like you, or you can message them directly. And that's how the eggplant pics are so prolific on there, is because you just get to message directly. You don't need permission to. So he opens the messages and he goes, what do I say? And I said, ask him if he's the Douglas College guy. We know that he is, but ask him. And that was our first mistake because now he's blocked. we can't get him. And every once in a while I'll go on Grindr and try to get him because there's certain profiles. The further they are from you, they're kind of blocked unless you have premium. So I've been trying to message him, but I can't get to him.
Because you don't have premium?
I don't have premium. It's not worth. It's $18 a month.
Oh my gosh.
I'm not that thirsty. I'm not.
Yeah, so maybe worth a hookup, but not worth $18.
Not worth $18 unless you're unless that's your thing. There are some people who are very into the hookup culture, who are very into just being able to have sex at the drop of a hat, and that's a lot of what Grindr is. So for them, it might be worth it, especially if you're not in a live-in partner relationship and you just can host. If you're bored, it's for some people. It is not for me. I got other stuff to do.
Yeah, as a fellow asexual, I will never understand hookup culture.
No.
But you know what? I respect it as long as you're being safe and
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I know that to make it work, if you have a long-term relationship and then you're both polyamorous in different ways, what are some of the boundaries that you have to make sure that it works?
First off, a lot of communication. Sometimes we're communicating until I'm tired of hearing myself talk. I'm tired of hearing him talk. But that's how you know that you're on the same page. You have to be both very aware of what's going on in the relationship. When he's going out on a date, he tells me that it's a date, and he'll text me, to let me know how it's going on. It feels a little uncomfy to me. It's different, again, for everybody. But I like to make sure that he's safe, especially if it's his first date with somebody off of an app. I'm just text me at this point and this point, and we're good. constant communication. I just said that. My brain's restarting. It's doing the thing. It's doing the wheel. What else is important to polyamory?
What about from his side? Like, is there any boundaries that he has in terms of...
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I keep him updated basically on my feelings about everybody in my group because mine is more romantically based, and that's not something he's directly asked for, but it's something that he's always appreciated when I come to him and I go, hey, I think my feelings are changing for this person, and I might be more romantically involved right now. And then, maybe a week later I'll backtrack and go, never mind, it was a crush. Yeah, they cut their hair.
Not the haircut.
Not the haircut.
Buzz cut season. Guys...
Not
You're
all
making
of you
a mistake.
Can rock a buzz cut. Not all of you can do it, please.
Most of you
all
can.
of you are Style Stilinski from Teen Wolf. You need to stop. But yeah, I talk very openly about my emotions. I also just have a motor mouth sometimes. So it's not even purposely sometimes. I'll just be giving him all the deets on how I'm feeling. And he appreciates that. We also always make time for each other because we are nesting partners. Which, for anybody who doesn't know what that means, it's your partners that live together and your partners that have a lot of activities that you do together. Like, we make dinner together. We're not just roommates. We share the bed. We both take care of the cats. We both take the garbage out. Only I take the compost out. But, he does the recycling. You live together in a very domestic relationship, romantic, and can be sexual, can be not sexual, but it's just, you're nested. As nesting partners, we always have to make time for each other throughout the week. Sometimes we both get busy and it just looks like little things in the morning. Like this morning I made him lunch because he's got an art studio out in Vancouver, and I forgot to put his lunch back in the fridge from Tuesday like he asked me to do, which I told him I would do it. So now that's on me because I told him I would and then I didn't. Mm-hmm. So I realized his lunch had got bad. So I made him a new lunch this morning and he was ecstatic.
Aww.
But that was just us spending some time together in the morning before we both go out and do our own things. So you have to be able to come back to each other and check in and see, do you need more attention? Is this enough? Is this too much? What are you getting from your other relationships? What are you missing? We're both looking into couples therapy right now as well to kind of, not to mitigate damage, but just to make sure no damage happens. Mm-hmm. It's best to go into therapy as a couple pretty early on to make sure that anything that's going to be a headbutting zone doesn't get to that really dangerous point. So it's just being able to work together is a big important one.
Yeah. I think so many more couples would be successful if they, therapy is not to fix a problem. Like, it can also be to prevent problems from happening. Like, you don't have to.
It's not a punishment.
Yeah.
It's not. A lot of people treat it like a punishment, and a lot of people will put it on somebody like a punishment as well. You see that a lot in media when couples are fighting on a TV show and they're like, you need to go to therapy. That's a punishment now. It's no longer, hey, I'm worried about you, I'd like us to go together, or maybe we need to work on this. It's something you should be looking forward to because you're really going to heal yourself. Mm-hmm. And it's going to help you and your partner to have that. We each have our own personal therapist that we see, but we're now looking at getting a together therapist. So it can only do good unless you find a really bad therapist. So be willing to switch around. I've had to switch quite a few times.
What if you went to a Christian couples therapist?
No.
That would be so funny. Would they even take you as?
I would go as a bit. I would go as a bit because he hasn't legally changed his name yet. We could still legally put both of our names.
And then you just walk into the appointment room.
Yeah, we walk in and I go,
"Oh, what's up?"
Get a hidden camera and do that for me, please, because that would be hilarious.
That would be so funny. Just the look on their face. Absolutely. Yeah, but I don't think I could do that seriously. I could do that as the just for laughs. Just for laughs, the pranks videos.
The pranks, yeah.
It would be a prank video. It would be a walking into Christian therapists as a gay trans couple.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we do the sound effects every time their eyebrows go up. Boing.
So you and your boyfriend have been living together for how long now?
About 3 to 4 months.
3 to 4 months. And
yeah.
Were you living independently before that?
Yes.
So he moved in with you?
Yes.
How was that adjustment, going from living alone to the domestic life?
We'd been seeing each other a lot leading up to that. For us, that adjustment was really chaotic, but mostly because there was a lot going on while he was moving in. He really injured his hand. I had a lot going on in school. We both got really sick within the first month, so it was chaotic for that reason. But like, he'd been coming to my house every week for a couple days a week, or I'd go over and stay at his place for a couple of days, leave like an automatic food dispenser on for my cats at home. We'd already been spending so much time together for like months leading up to that it just felt very natural. At least for me, it felt very natural to have him there. I think he's still doing quite a bit of adjusting because he is coming into my home, and because it is quite a small home, it is hard to move it around and make it more of his and mine than mine that he's living in, you know?
Yeah.
Because I've been living in it for 4 years now, 4.5, whatever. It's like almost 5 now. It's my little hovel, you know, I've made it my own, which is good until somebody else moves in and they're like, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? And I want to say yes, but also there's a really protective part of me, especially because that was my first place that I lived in after coming out, after being in such a hostile environment. It was my sanctuary. So I really struggle sometimes in like, this was my only space. Like, don't mess with my space. But he's not trying to mess with it. He's just trying to live with me in it. So there's an inner dialogue going on sometimes when I want to make changes and I realize, oh, I have to ask him before I move furniture around, right? You know? So that's, like, I'm adjusting to being unhinged around him now. He sees me chew on my toenails. He sees me, like, naked, sitting on the couch, eating
goblin
popcorn,
mode.
Complete goblin mode. I'm able to do it. Like, I'm at 99% around him at home now, and I'm never 99% around anybody. So I'm comfortable with him. It's just being able to move my space around. It's being able to. It's not fully mine anymore, and that's a little spooky.
Are you planning to move out in the future? I mean, you probably are, but like how soon?
My lease, you know, you get like a mortgage lease. You're stuck into the mortgage for 5 years. You stay in the house, whatever, is up in October. And I would like a house with a backyard or like a patio, or just like, it's such a little cave hovel thing. I've done about as much as I can with it, but it's only got windows on one side, and it's only one window. And then the other one is just like a patio door. So it does not get light in there. Like, I got 2 cats. I want them to be able to run around. It's just not ideal, especially for 2 people. Like, we bump into each other all the time. I want to leave as soon as the lease is up. Ideally out of Abbotsford. We've been talking the island, maybe Nanaimo or Victoria, see what we can afford out there. I'm a big travel guy. I would love to live in Europe and hop to different countries throughout, and like, we're gonna live in Spain for a couple of years, we're gonna live in France for a couple of years, we're gonna go here. That's kind of my ideal setting, which also kind of butts heads with the me wanting to settle down and have kids.
Yeah.
You know, there's 2 wolves inside of you. One of you wants to travel globally for your whole life, and one of you wants babies. So that's a bit up in the air right now, but we've been looking recently at the island. Yeah, and that would probably happen in a year. It's still, you know, not immediately, but we are looking at moving soon.
And what about Caden? Is he a travel? Which wolf is he?
He's not really either of them. He's got an art wolf. And that's kind of that's the wolf that I recognize the most. He didn't really want to. I want to say that I didn't really want to have kids before we met each other. And part of that was because we both had expectations placed on us by previous partners that we were going to be the ones carrying or making or taking care of. You know, we both grew up AFAB. So the expectation was always, you are the matriarch, you take care of the children, you make the children, all that kind of stuff. Right? So he had a very...
Which is scary. Like, that's a lot to do.
Especially if you don't want to. Like, I got to a point where I was like, I don't want kids. I don't. Because it was expected of me. So I had to really go through this whole healing process and come to terms with the fact that I did want kids. And actually, maybe I want to make kids. That might be a process that I do want to partake in. And when I brought that to Caden, I think we talked about it early in the relationship, and it's just still an ongoing conversation. He realized, oh, I don't have to make it and be the only one taking care of it. We can do kids however we want to do kids. We can do co-parenting. So parenting with another couple of parents, another one person, another 7 people, co-parenting like polyamory looks very different from person to person. And you don't have to be in a romantic or sexual relationship with the other parents. It can just be somebody that you're really good friends with. And you're like, I trust you to raise children with me. But that made a big difference for him, knowing that we did not have to do it in the cookie cutter way that he'd been told that he had to do it. It's not a wolf that he really had barking at him. Maybe it will be in the future once he's done a little bit more processing. Maybe it won't be. I don't know. All I know is I got the baby wolf, and sometimes it's loud. Like a baby passes by me in a stroller, and I turn to Kaden, and I'm like,
Make me one. I want it. Give it to me.
The baby fever is ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say I relate because I don't, like, I've always liked kids, so, but I've never gotten the fever part of it. Like, I've never.
It's like a physical feeling in your body. It's not just like a mental, like, your brain saying, I want it. Like, I feel it, like, in my skin. It's like, get that baby. Get it. I think that's a whole other conversation because it's intense, and I didn't realize it was such an actual physical, intense feeling. And we make fun of women, we make fun of non-binary, anybody who wants a baby, we make fun of them for this whole baby fever. It feels kind of mean sometimes, because I'm like, it's tough. And then when your partner is not in that space, like Kaden isn't always in that space, and that's fine. We're all processing, we're all taking life how we need to take it at our own time. But sometimes it is such like a physically powerful feeling for me, and I need to bring it to somebody, and I'm like, Kaden, this is what I'm going through. And he's like, I just don't have the spoons to have this conversation right now. And it feels overwhelming, and it's tough.
Have you ever talked about your desire to, like, have your own kids? Like, you want to get pregnant, right?
Yep.
Have you ever talked to somebody about that and gotten, like, some weird reactions? Because you are male presenting and you tend to align with, like, you know, you use he, they pronouns. Has that ever come up for you?
I tend not to share it in spaces that I think will be of a danger to me. Since I'm still processing that myself, I know that I'm not really mentally stable enough yet with it to bring that to people that might have a negative response to it. I've not even brought it to my parents yet. The last that we talked about it, I was like, I don't want to have kids. Maybe I'll adopt. So they don't even really know that I'm more on the DIY easy bake train yet. I did have
the easy bake.
The easy bake. Yeah.
Your little easy bake oven.
It's my little easy bake oven. I did have a non-binary friend who was really surprised. Was like, you want to use your womb? What? And that was about the most negative one that I've gotten so far. I've gotten a lot of excitement from most of the people that I bring it to. I had one friend, not it was kind of like a friend of a friend, a sister of a friend. I went to like a family barbecue of theirs, and she just got so excited. She goes, you're gonna look so cute pregnant. I know exactly what you should wear. Like, it was just such a really good moment to bounce off of each other. Like, you just got to know the right crowd, I find, with that kind of conversation. But it is scary to talk about the first time. Especially if you don't know how somebody's going to react. Like, I'm pretty certain, but maybe you're going to find this icky. And that's going to, like, that feeling of ickiness is going to push onto me. And this is something that I'm very excited about. It took me so long to remove the feeling of shame surrounding that. I don't want to bring it back on.
Yeah.
You know?
What do you feel about the sort of uproar about people saying people who can get pregnant, or like people who can menstruate, and then some people will like get super angry and be like, just say woman? How do you sort of feel about that whole situation? Because you're obviously somebody who can get pregnant but wouldn't be comfortable with the label woman.
Yeah, that's a tough one, especially as somebody who would like to get pregnant, who would like to easy bake oven a child. I would like to make my own crotch goblin. Yes, thank you. It's kind of hard to listen to that conversation, to be talked about. It kind of relates back to the its pronouns. It feels like being talked about as opposed to being talked to. And I've stayed mostly out of that because to me it feels, it's a dog whistle. It's a dog whistle for, we don't want trans people to exist. In the same way that when people talk about like gender ideologies in classrooms, you're not actually worried about that. You just don't want trans people to exist. people need somebody to hate. And right now that's trans people. So they'll latch on to anything that they can point to and say, see, this is how it's harming us. This is how it's changing our society. It's changing our language, but language is always changing. Like, I've taken so many English courses, so many literature courses. Language means everything and nothing at the same time. It can change at the drop of a hat. The word dog used to be a catch-all for all animals, not just dogs. So, like, we would think that's silly now. You point at a horse and call it dog, you get called stupid now. But back in the day, horses were just a type of dog. Everything was a type of dog. Language changes so often, and it needs to. It needs to change with our society. So people get really hung up on stuff like that. And it's not because they're actually mad about language changing. It has to change. They just need somebody to hate. And right now, the easiest person to hate is trans people, because there is such a small community of us. Like, it's not small. There's still millions of us.
Yeah.
But, like, in the grand scheme of billions of people, 8 billion people now, it's a lot easier to hate on these smaller communities, because you hate on them enough. There's only, like, a few left who are willing to be loud about it. It's an easy target. We're an easy target right now.
And gender is one of those power structures that is so deeply ingrained into our society, and trying to break that down, it's scary for a lot of people who benefit from it or who are very comfortable in it, whether or not they benefit from it.
Gender was a capitalist ploy to sell us bathrooms. It's a money-making machine. Unfortunately, that's a big part of gender right now, and why people are holding on to it so dearly. Because if there's not a boys and a girls section, how am I going to pick my wardrobe? You're going to pick what you want to wear, fam. I hate to put you in the nebulous void along with me, but you can wear what you want. You can paint your room whatever colors you want. There's no actual rules, but when there's rules, we can sell you things. We can sell you things that help you follow the rules. I hate capitalism.
That's a whole other conversation.
It really is.
We could honestly go for another hour. Me too. Like, me as well.
I'll come on the podcast again.
Honestly, I would love that. I would love to have you again. Anyways, capitalism. We hate it. It sucks.
It's gotta go.
Let's talk about how straight people are actually gay. Because I know we've had conversations about this before, because you're English lit major?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. You love to write essays about any literature that you're reading in class and analyzing it for all, like, the tiny little the gay parts.
This
like,
is
the
how
queerness.
it relates to queerness.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't think that it related to queerness, but this is actually how it relates to queerness. I'll go off on two a little bit. One's a literature thing that I'm doing right now in my 19th century literature course, and one is a history course that I took. So there's always, like, gay people have always existed, queer people, trans people. The language changes. Again, language is always changing. The language changes throughout human history. So one of the big caveats about talking about this stuff right now is when we talk about, like, queer people from Greece, they wouldn't have identified as queer. They would have just identified as people. So it's kind of a sticking point for some people where they'll go, well, actually, Sappho wasn't queer. She just was. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but how does this relate to, like, how do we talk about it? Because we still need to be able to talk about it, and it's still important to pulling human history apart, and it's important because identity politics is such a big thing right now. If we're not able to talk about it and relate it to our current day, it's going to get taken away from us. You know, we're not going to be allowed to talk about it. I took a history of Aztecs and Mayas course, and in it we talked about La Noche Triste, probably saying that wrong. It's basically the day that the Spaniards decided, that's it, we're taking over. Like, they were already moving in to the area that is now Mexico, and, you know, they were making their little camps, and they're like, okay, so you got to change this way. They were doing their bartering, you know, the way that we did, all the settlers are always doing. We sneak in, and then one day, it's the big day. We take over today. So that was La Noche Triste. And a big talking point on that is people don't really know why it was that day. What set them off that we had to pick today to do it? It's because everything apparently was going pretty smoothly up until that point. Everybody was pretty cool with each other. My theory is that it was ancient pride. because they were having actually a celebration on that day for one of their gods, Tezcatlipoca, which is known as the trickster god. And
how did you say that without stuttering?
because I talked so much about Tezcatlipoca. I love them so much because they're so very genderqueer. They're able to inhabit whatever body they want to inhabit. They inhabit the animals. They don't really have, like, in what we can see of them, because a lot of their culture has been just wiped, right? Because we're like, no, they never had a culture. We gave it to them. You're welcome. You know, the settler thing. So it's really hard to actually find a lot of their history because we wrote over it. But what we can find, I've been like, that looks pretty gay to me. I don't know, by modern standards, of course. Contemporarily, that looks pretty gay to me. So I wrote a lot about Tezcatlipoca, and that celebration was about them. And part of that celebration is 1 year ago, like the day after, there's a celebration day, basically pretend it's like June 8th. I can't remember what day it actually is. On June 9th is when they pick a representative for the next year's celebration. So people can't see I'm doing the hand signals, but they pick somebody to live basically genderless in their society for a year. And then on that day of celebration, they sacrifice them, which, you know, they did a little sacrifices back then, which contemporarily not cool, but still a very genderqueer moment to kind of like pick somebody to take your gender away and make them Tezcatlipoca, like to just exist. So my experience reading about that was, oh, this feels very like celebrating pride, celebrating queerness, celebrating gender nonconformity to me. And even in some of the writings around that night, they mention sodomy, and they're like, there was a lot of sodomy going on, so we had to, you know, we had to do something about it. And that's a word that they used for gay sex a lot of the time, you know, especially the colonizers. They were like, we had to stop the sodomy, it's just not cool. So I did a big essay on, like, this is how I think, like, this is what I think was the tipping point, is they came over and they said, here's Jesus. He will show you how to be a good man. He will show you how to be straight. You know, they came over with their religion. They came over to show them the way to do it. And then they came to this celebration and they're like, there's just no hope. They're just so far gone on the being able to be yourself train, you know, that we gotta put an end to it. That was basically what my essay was.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And I love hearing about, like, it is queer history, and like, yes, some spiritual practices like the human sacrifice are very something that we don't like these days.
Well, and no culture is going to have everything that we like these days. You know, I think we're backtracking a little bit too much now. We're kind of doing a 180 right now, where we're putting cultures that have been colonized on a pedestal. Like, how dare you do this to them? But, like, they also were not always doing all of the best practices. That doesn't mean that we need to murder them all and take them all over, but they're not gods. You know, we do not need to put them on a pedestal. We need to look at this all realistically, and we need to talk about this all realistically. And we need to know that we're going to make mistakes. Not everything I said is probably going to be true. Again, it's all just stuff that I'm researching, trying to pull apart. Queer history is really hard to pull apart in that way, because you find something that you think is true, you follow it all the way back, and then it's not. Like, darn it, now I got to start over and find how it's queer in a different way.
What's an example of that?
Mary Wollstonecraft, what I'm working on right now, I was trying to find something in her writings. She wrote The Vindications of the Rights of Women and the Vindications of the Rights of Men, which was some of the most game-changing proto-feminist literature of Great Britain of, it's like the late 18th century, early 19th century, when people were really reading it. I was like, how do I find how this is queer? How is she talking about queer people in this? And she's really not. Like, I dug into it for hours, for days, and I was like, how does she mention queer people in her writings? She doesn't. She pulls from a lot of people that we know as queer now, like Shakespeare. She talks a lot about Shakespeare. And Shakespeare is, you know, contemporarily, we know that he wrote a lot of his sonnets about men. He wrote about transgender women. He wrote about drag queens. He's like, As You Like It? Come on. That play was all about gender. Like, very, very queer writer. And Mary Wollstonecraft pulled a lot from him. But she never actually was like, give the queers rights, do any of that stuff. So it's as much as I do think she was still partaking in that, she never talked about queer liberation in the way that I was looking for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then she also, fun fact, she gave birth to Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, which is a big pillar of queer literature now. Everybody looks at Frankenstein and it's a big kind of like, for transgender people, it's a like being seen as transgender. You're very alienated. It's big in queer discourse right now to talk about Frankenstein and what it means and like what are its queer implications. And like, did Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley pull any of that from her mom, or was that just like it didn't skip Mary Wollstonecraft, right? Because she had to read a lot of her literature. She's got so much queer surrounding her that I'm like, how did she partake in it? Was she able to partake in it? Because she died pretty young as well. She died in childbirth for Mary Shelley.
Oh,
right.
How old was she?
35 or something like that.
Okay,
She was still pretty young. Yeah, like a little ironic for a proto-feminist to die in childbirth. And give birth to Mary Shelley, though. So, I mean, at least we got her.
That's true.
And we did get some writings from Mary Wollstonecraft, which were integral to feminism today. You read them now, and you're like, oh, girly, that's a lot. Because she talks about women as mothers. But that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. We will have all these other conversations at some point.
many podcast episodes later, Nathan finally gets all of the information out of his brain.
This is going to be like a never-ending podcast.
Yes. Oh, I'm having so much fun. I'm finally loving my voice in this little microphone.
Right?
So.
It's something about the mics. Like, I swear, like, you get on it, you hear yourself talking, and you're like, I could talk for hours like this. It's like, my voice is so smooth. I sound so smart.
Something about listening to podcasts makes me feel, oh, these people know everything. Even when they're like, and I know nothing.
Right. Tell me about your fan fiction essay.
Oh, this was a couple years ago now. I wrote an essay. It was a genre course. So it was just about genre. What does genre mean? And it's not always like horror versus sci-fi versus romance. There's other types of genre, which my brain's restarting a little bit right now, so it's hard to dig fully into it. Basically, my final essay was about fan fiction is a genre, and we need to respect it as a genre, and we need to be able to talk about it in these genre conversations, because some people look down on it. They're like a bunch of 12-year-olds writing, smut for One Piece, which was me.
The self-call out.
Whoa. I wrote so much fan fiction growing up. It was ridiculous. So that was part of why I wanted to write about it.
As did I. And it was actually, I would say, integral to my own like coming out and like realization of my queerness, because it was actually one of my first introductions to queer relationships, because I was reading Harry Styles fan fiction.
You had the after on your saved tab. I see.
I probably did. But I stumbled across what I thought was, Harry and some self-insert girl character. But no, it was Harry and Louis. And when I realized, I was like, I don't hate this for some reason. Even though, I was still like, I was a Christian kid. Like, I didn't know much about gay people, but I knew that, they weren't really supposed to go together, but I really didn't hate it. I actually liked it a lot. And then I kept reading more Larry fan fiction.
It's called Larry?
It's called Larry.
Oh, that's funny. Oh, that's good. My go-to was One Piece. I was big into anime in middle school, high school. I read a lot of One Piece fan fiction. Saying that, everybody's already going to know who I was reading about, because it's always Zoro and Sanji. That is always the pairing that gets people into the One Piece fan fiction, because it's the chemistry between them. It's ridiculous. It's the enemies to love. Well, not enemies. What's the one where you hate each other but you're like besties? Like, you're in a group and it's like you've got that
frenemies?
Rivalry.
Oh, rivalry.
Yeah, it's like a rivalry to lovers. Like, that was the big for me. I was just like, they are meant to be. And I can't explain how I know, but I just know that they are meant to be together. And I wrote so much fanfic for that. And then from that point on, every time I got into a new fandom, I was writing fan fiction for whatever my favorite gay pairing was. Because I never found myself writing straight fan fiction, because there's already so much straight representation in all of those, every single fandom that I was in always had a couple of straight couples or a main straight couple. It was always there at the forefront, but there was never enough queer representation. So that's why there's so much of that fan fiction out there. I can't remember if that was part of my essay, but it's integral to respect fan fiction for that reason. It's where a lot of queer people go to actually find their first representation. Like now we have a lot more like fiction and nonfiction queer stuff out there. We've got the Queer Book Club covering so much.
Nice plug.
I know, right? Hey, Knights of the Bound Fable. But
for those who don't know, Nate has decided to start a queer book club at UFV. But anyways, back to the fan fiction. It was where you found representation for yourself. And actually, in the conversation that I had with Emma, she mentioned that creative writing was one of her outlets for how she actually discovered her own gender identity, because she felt comfortable writing from a woman's perspective. So was that something that helped you as well with your identity?
I would say, looking back on it now, yeah, because I never, as somebody born in AFAB, you would expect me to kind of at least dabble in, let me write some femme on femme fics, let me write some Sapphic fics. No, it never interested me. It was always, I need to write some MLM, male loving male. I need to see my boys falling in love. And I was always seeing myself in male characters. The big one that I still hold on to is, I brought this up earlier, Styles Stilinski from Teen Wolf was just the one that I saw him and I was like, that's mine. That's me. That's the goal now. I want to be snarky and I want to be like this scrawny little weirdo. That's the goal. But like, you when you're writing, again, speaking from a fan fiction perspective, you get to play with those characters and really get into their head in a way that you can't when you're watching the show or watching the movie. So I really got to experiment with my own identity and with how, if I was that character, how would I be feeling in this moment? And that you really pour yourself into your writing like that. And I wrote probably like 30 different fan fictions before I actually started coming into my identity. And then I looked back on all that and I went, that makes sense. That makes sense. Because I always wrote it, I basically was the self-insert character in a lot of these fics that I was writing. It was just, I would find characters in TV that kind of fit my body build, kind of fit my identity already, and then just molded it to more of what I was experiencing or what I would like to experience. It helped me explore myself safely. It was kind of like subconsciously exploring myself without like purposely doing it, you know? Like I wasn't ready to recognize that that's what I was doing was exploration, because I was so closeted and because there were so many barriers still in my brain to experiencing my gender. But subconsciously my body was still like, here's how we're gonna let you explore.
And that's so interesting, because the fan fictions that I would write, I wouldn't say I definitely didn't write as many as you did. But some of the ones that I can remember, like my cringiest ones from when I was like 11 or 12, they were One Direction fan fictions. But the self-insert female character was never sexually pursued by the male character. So like the One Direction, it was always like we think this girl is really cool and we want to be best friends with her.
Your brain's just like, let me help you.
Yeah.
Your brain in the background is like, let me help you figure this out. One day you will look back at these and you'll be able to make sense of it. I like that. I relate to you so much right now.
Yeah, so fan fiction is, and it always annoyed me too when I would read so much fan fiction and I'd be like, or like for English class, we had to read a certain amount of books for school credit. But they had to be real books.
Yeah.
And I was like, some of these fan fictions that I'm reading are better written than these real books. And they're more interesting to me. Yep. And why does it matter just because they haven't been able to go through the, horrible publishing industry that's like super hard to publish into, like it just didn't make sense to me.
It's a little classist in that way as well, because there's all of this great work that's out there and people cannot afford to have it published. And there's a lot of barriers for queer publishing to still get out there. There's a lot of really great queer literature out there in the fan fiction world, but it covers some really intense topics. It covers self-harm, or it covers kink, or it covers whatever it is that people aren't fully comfortable with in cis heteronormative structures to talk about. So it just doesn't, it's hard to get that stuff out there. And it's got to be really painful to not be able to bring some of your favorite works into your classes, into your social spheres, into work, wherever.
And then when they do get published, it's always the bad ones.
It's always
It's
the bad
worst ones.
I'm looking at you, 50 Shades. I am looking at you, Snow Queen, Ice Dragon. I know your IP.
Gosh.
I don't.
Yeah, I've never read 50 Shades or watched it, but
I've watched one.
yeah.
And I watched the first 50 Shades while I was in Japan with my French friend, because she was like, this is your culture. Show me your culture. I was like, it's not, I swear to God.
Is that what white culture is?
It's trash.
It's just
Yeah.
It's just 50 Shades of Grey. Just
Yeah. Well, and we watched it together, and she was like, this is awful. And I was like, why did you want to watch this? We could have literally watched anything. We could have watched Drag Race. We could have watched Canada's Drag Race, and that would be closer.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, this has been a lovely conversation. Very long one too. But
Yes.
it's been super fun, and I'm so glad to have had you on this podcast, and I would definitely have you on again at some point.
I would love to. I would love to be here again. Oh, I feel like I want my own podcast at some point, because I have so many topics that I want to go into deeply. Like, I could do just a polyamory episode. I could do 6 of those. There's so much to talk about. Oh, but thank you for having me. This has been so nice, and you're so lovely, and you're doing such a great job.
Thank
we're
you.
bouncing back so nicely.
Thank you.
I know I have to take part of that just in the self-love era. I know I have to recognize myself for part of that, but also in the recognizing your friends and loved ones, I recognize you for that. You're doing awesome.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I appreciate you so much, and I'm so glad that you could come on this podcast, and it was super fun. And you will have your own podcast one day, so
One day.
stay tuned for that.
One day.
Goodbye. Goodbye.